It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are going to talk about Unwieldy Creatures by Annie Tsai. Alexis, would you like to do the plot, or shall I do the plot?
Why don't you do the plot? You've read the book more recently.
Okay, so we got 3 point of view characters in this book, and they spend most of the book telling each other their life stories. This is a book based on Frankenstein. It is a queer retelling of Frankenstein, which it says on the cover, so I'm not,
Queer near future retelling of Frankenstein.
Sure, the book's sense of time and place is really pretty vague. So
Yes.
Frank is a biologist whose mission in life is to be able to allow lesbians to reproduce with one another without any male interference. And so synthesizes sperm from her lover to create an embryo, but her blind ambition leads her to create a monster.
And her blind ambition and her, villainous adopted brother.
Yes. So you get the idea. Frankenstein. It's Frankenstein with lesbians in the near future with sort of IVF instead of corpse robbing.
Yeah.
I probably could have just said that last sentence and that would do it.
And almost everyone is biracial.
Yeah, no. Well, almost everybody who we are meant to sympathize with is biracial. In fact, everybody we're meant to sympathize with is biracial. Let's see here. Are there lesbians in this book?
Well, there's queer AFAB people who don't necessarily identify as lesbian, but also don't necessarily not identify as lesbian, so...
Yep. And wizards?
I think that Dr. Frank is pretty close to a wizard.
Yeah, no, Dr. Frank is clearly one of our wizards who is also a lesbian or a... and Dr. Frank would probably choose to identify as a lesbian for reasons that I'll get into later.
I will note that both characters pretty consistently refer to themselves as queer, and I believe Dr. Frank refers to herself as non-binary.
Yeah, good Lord, but that interferes.
And I think the word lesbian doesn't actually appear in the book. Yeah,
that interferes with the reading that kind of salvages the book for me, though, so I'm going to ignore that. Why should you read this book?
I think it does some interesting things with language. And I thought it was an interesting book. I don't think it was a good book, but I thought it was an interesting book.
Can you go into any more detail about why a person would want to read this?
Well, it does. Like I said, it does some interesting things with language, with working Mandarin into, including in characters into the text, and it does. I found the story to be, to stick with me, even if it was because not because I liked it, but because my brain had to sort of keep poking at it.
Yes. This is I would say why you should read it is if you read Sappho's Bar and Grill and you want a response to Sappho's Bar and Grill.
Yes, exactly.
This is both a good sort of, counterpoint to the point of view espoused in Sappho's Bar and Grill, and also just an interesting look into sort of contemporary queerness as it construes itself.
Yes. And
it's also very funny, although I don't think it's very funny on purpose, much like Sappho's Bar and Grill was very funny in places, but not on purpose. We do end up deciding that this book is funny on purpose, even though it never so much as cracks a smile. This is not a courtesy we afforded the last couple books we covered. Maybe we're giving this one more credit because the ideology involved is closer to ours. You'll have to figure that out for yourself.
I also, if you know, a lot of people are constantly complaining that what they want is more messy queer representation, and boy, is this full of messy queers.
Absolutely.
If you want some, you know, extremely messy queer people of color having all sorts of highly dysfunctional relationships all over the place, then this will definitely scratch that itch.
Yeah, and it's a very messy book on top of that. So I think this falls into the glorious mess category.
I think so too. This is what I mean by like, it's not that I necessarily liked it or thought it was a good book, but like, it was interesting in a way that some stuff that's, you know, objectively better written or whatever did not hold my interest.
Yes. As to why you shouldn't read this book, I personally found the prose to be so poorly done that it made reading the book actually difficult. It varies because, again, we have 3 authorial voices, and one of the authorial voices or one of the narrative voices is specifically meant to evoke 19th century novels, which are, and Victorian novel prose is itself a challenge for me particularly. But this is an attempt at Victorian prose by somebody who cannot really pull that off. And the results are just sometimes completely incoherent and challenging, like just from a technical standpoint. So if that kind of thing bugs you, if you're going to be like really annoyed by run-on sentences and repetitious use of language and overuse of adverbs and all of the stuff that like an intro to writing class will tell you not to do, you're going to find that in spades in here.
Right, but on the same time, I mean, and maybe this is just that I have a higher tolerance for this stuff, I actually tend to find that more interesting than totally stripped down, attempting to be Hemingway-esque prose.
It doesn't have to be Hemingway. I don't even fucking like Hemingway. I like D.H. Lawrence. I like Virginia Woolf. Minimalism is fine. Maximalism is fine. It just has to be well done. And this isn't. It is interesting, but it's there is a right way and a wrong way to do that, and the way that sacrifices intelligibility is the wrong way to do that.
I actually thought that she did a reasonably good job of evoking some of like the linguistic rhythms of 19th century prose.
She absolutely did, but that's not a good thing.
I don't know. I mean, she said it, you know, I feel like the author is they set an artistic goal, and I actually feel like they did a reasonable job of achieving it. And you may disagree with like the worth of this artistic goal, but I mean, this book is partly a commentary on, you know, 19th century literature and like on queer readings and the sort of process of doing queer readings of 19th century literature. And you know, so like, I think this is part of the glorious mess thing. And I think that, you know, how much you fall down on glorious versus mess is going to depend on partly your tolerance for this sort of prose. But
that's actually another reason maybe why you should read the book is if you don't like Victorian novels and you want something that punctures a few things about Victorian novels, this book does that. It definitely functions well as a satire on some things that Victorian novels are very bad at, if you give it the credit. Let's see here, but you have to go in with certain expectations, and one of them is you can't expect human beings to talk like human beings, or to have a coherent sense of place or culture or time or.
Absolutely nobody in these books acts or talks like a human being.
Right. This is a book of ideas, yes. Put it that way. And My problem, as with a lot of academic texts, actually, is that the way that it is written is subservient to the ideas to the extent that sometimes it is very difficult to tell what is happening.
And as somebody who reads academic texts for my job, this is a way easier read than even fairly well written monographs.
This isn't cartoony
humanities
here,
monographs,
but so that being said, there's if you like the idea that there's a lot of sort of really raw kind of racism, sexism, homophobia, just sort of
internalized self-hatred, internalized depression.
Yeah, all the bad parenting in the world. So
many bad parents.
Cartoonishly bad parenting. Then maybe don't read it. But like, as Alexis keeps saying, it is very interesting. And a lot of the ideas that it brings up are very interesting. And I'm looking forward to getting into that a little bit. Hey, Alexis, is that all the content warnings?
Oh, no. No, actually, you're right. Content warnings. There's like tampering with people's reproductive choices. There's, coerced pregnancy. There's parental violence, regular violence, plus again, the wide range of phobias and isms. There's misgendering, accidental and deliberate, mostly deliberate. All manner of like toxic and abusive relationships.
Both of our main point of view characters are misandrist and hate white people, if that bothers you.
I think that you're overstating that. I don't actually think that there's I'm willing to give you misandrist. I'm not sure I'm willing to give you hates white people.
They make up a slur for white people and just sort of throw it around.
Having cut a fairly intense conversation about racism, we will just simply note that this book is a strong contender for the Misandry Award and is quite hostile towards white people in a way that the degree to which you view that as justified and textually supported is going to vary on, by the reader.
So it's at this point we get into a long fight about whether the book is racist against white people, which we both know is not a thing that is really possible because, racism is prejudice plus power. The thing is that neither of us actually think the book is racist against white people. I think the book contains racial animus against whites and like slurs against whites, which it does, and some people might need content warnings about it. Because it angries up the blood if you're white, and it makes things hard to talk about. But anyway, we do eventually figure out that we're both on the same page and go on to talk about the book, so it's fine. Stay tuned to the end for a more thorough discussion of this topic. And it's the spoiler zone. So this book is about failed parenting in a lot of ways. And it is about
failed
parenting.
Which makes sense, because the original Frankenstein is kind of about failed parenting.
Yeah. It takes that theme and it sort of explores it on a number of different levels, like from the personal level to a cultural level also. It gets to inherited trauma. It gets to sort of paternalistic imperialism and the lasting effects it has on the victims of paternalistic imperialism. Specifically, it really sort of goes into detail with our villain, who gets actually, I think, most of the book to explain her own story.
I think so.
That's Dr. Frank, who is, of course, Dr. Frankenstein.
Right.
Dr. Frank's birth name is Well. So she names herself Z Frank, after the white YouTuber who got famous by doing a Morgan Freeman impression. Does this seem accidental? Who knows with this thing? It's very hard to remember the author is dead.
Who, like, I believe deliberately names herself Dr. Frank as an homage to Frankenstein.
Yes. No. Everybody in this retelling of Frankenstein has read Frankenstein,
Yes.
which, means that we have to take into account their deliberate evocations thereof. So let's first establish that Dr. Frank is the villain of the piece.
Yes.
They?
I think she.
Okay,
I think she. But I don't know.
Is, yeah, it's sort of...
Lee uses she to refer to Dr. Frank, and Lee is definitely the character who is most sensitive to misgendering and, most diligent about using the appropriate pronouns for everyone.
Yeah. Which we'll circle back to. Dr. Frank is mixed race, is the daughter of a Texas oil man and a poor Malaysian teenager who was essentially offered to the Texas oil man as a business incentive, and then treated like a pet that the oil man didn't really want to, adopt for life necessarily. The Texas oil man adopted a white son shortly after she was born.
And by adopted, we're not sure if by adopted, how formal. It may have been formal. He may just have, picked a boy up off a lawn somewhere and is like, well, I'm a rich guy.
I mean, the boy is Norwegian. I think that even, whenever this is supposed to have taken place, there are probably at least a few laws in place to prevent you from just picking orphans up off the streets of Oslo or wherever it was. But the sort of the conceit of the book is that we're shaving off anything that might prevent this Texas oil man dad from being, the incarnation of an American imperialist villain who takes what he wants, and knows, this is one of my favorite sentences from the book, he knows from his long experience as an oil man that the way to get an Asian woman to marry you is to buy her an expensive meal. Because that's one of the things they teach you in oil man school. But she falls for his bewitching blue eyes, and
she doesn't really have a choice.
No, she doesn't have a choice. But nonetheless, the book mentions how bewitching his beauty and blue eyes are. And she follows him back to America. They have this kid. They have their adopted son. The adopted son is obviously a queer-coded little twink who gets traumatized by his adopted father into being a normal masked dude. But she gets traumatized by her father into basically deciding that men need to be removed from the reproductive cycle because she is a butch lesbian, and both her father and her immigrant mother and grandmother, her immigrant mother is like, it's okay, but you have to hide it. Her grandma's going to be too traditional to allow anything to interfere with the...
and your father will flip out.
Right, exactly. But he is an abusive monster, of course, who hits everybody and yells at everybody. And Dr. Frank takes away from this experience a volcanic temper that she inherits from her father, and a drive to, in the way that you would expect from an abused person, the drive to become, secure, powerful, and to be able to work around and away from all of the things that might, frighten her in her life. But what this means in principle is that she manipulates her high school girlfriend essentially into becoming a surrogate parent for a fetus that she has engineered out of. She thinks she's engineering out of her egg and her high school girlfriend's, tissue, which she grows into sperm. But her brother, who has become a monster because of her father's
Abuse.
very strange Victorian insistence that the two of them marry each other. Again, it's like this book seems to exist in no particular time, and with no particular people. And that's, again, that's fine. That realism is not what this book wants. She ends up accidentally killing her friend, and then because the baby is monstrous.
I mean, what happens is that she discovers that the babe that her brother has replaced this the embryo that she and her girlfriend created with an embryo of him and that between Z, Dr. Frank, and him, and she realizes this before the embryo is implanted and decides, I'd rather not wait another, couple months to redo the whole process. I'll just stick this in my girlfriend instead.
Right, which is meant to indicate to us that the thing that was really motivating her to do this is not like love for her, her girlfriend,
or desire to build a family together or anything, but just
ambition and drive and anger
and impatience
and pride
and impatience and a sense of entitlement.
Right.
And then because, as it turns out, they have a shared genetic defect, and so the baby is born with a very large head and very large in general, and as a result, the girlfriend dies in childbirth because, again, this is basically a 18th, 19th century novel.
Yes, so the girlfriend dies in childbirth, and Dr. Frank abandons the baby in the woods, like you do in a 19th century novel. There are a lot of woods in America in this book, is this supposed to take place in Oxford?
I believe that this is taking place in the American South, which, to be fair, there's still a fair amount of woods there.
See, I thought that you would be more protective of the way that this book talks about the South with capital letters, but maybe that's time gone by now.
It just doesn't talk about the South very much, and the thing is, they do all end up living there. So, anyway, they're not in Georgia, so I don't care.
Okay. Point being that the question whether Texas is actually the South is yet another sidebar.
I'm perfectly fine with people being rude about Texas.
Right. Exactly. So. This book,
this has sort of fallen into becoming a long point by point plot recitation.
Well, I'm trying to establish that Dr. Frank is the villain of the piece, right?
Yes, I mean it's obvious Dr. Frank is the villain of the piece because Dr. Frank, understands that that much of what she is doing is exhibiting the worst characteristics of her father, and yet she keeps doing them. I mean, she's angry and abusive towards her girlfriend pretty much from the start. As soon as her girlfriend ever does something like, "Oh, here's this thing you're super into. I've brought you an article about it," and she explodes into a violent rage. So it's pretty clear from the beginning, even before she starts, making decisions about her girlfriend's, reproduction without her girlfriend's informed consent. But she treats everybody extremely poorly all the time. Like even pre-monstrous little brother, when he's still, an adorable, beautiful blonde child who all he wants to do is design pretty clothing. She keeps saying how she treats him like a doll, and really at no point does she ever understand that maybe that it's not a great way to treat another person.
Yeah. So this is all before she coerces her ambitious underling her intern who was homeless before she embarked on this career path into being the surrogate for another child, and also fucks her, and sort of in a really, sort of gross, age and power gap relationship, while she's gestating the child. So she's a horrible, horrible person. We get to see
she's a horrible, horrible person. And one of the things I think that makes, because the thing is that she's constantly trying to blame her horribleness on the fact that she had an abusive white father. But it's really clear from the beginning that actually the reason that she's horrible is that she has power and she doesn't, treat other people as human. And like that's not, that's not even necessarily something, it's not a genetic thing that she inherited from her father. It's just that she actually was an entitled rich kid. And
yes. Although she thinks that it's a genetic thing that she inherited.
She does, but I feel like the text is ambiguous in a way that I think makes it a fairly, easy interpretation that this is, an example of somebody trying to, a pretty cruel and abusive person trying to claim that everything bad she has done is because of, the existence of, racism and sexism, even as she's perpetuating a lot of the stuff herself.
Yes, no, I don't disagree with that at all. She thinks that way. And also, Lee thinks that way up to a point. Lee is sort of, has the same sort of feelings about, an inner monster, inner dirtiness that she associates with her sort of gender identity. At the early beginning, she's talking about a monster within herself, which you can interpret as being like her maleness, her attraction to women, or her mixedness. When in fact it's because she has an abusive father, and that's probably why her mother left.
Yes.
And but Lee is also suffering sort of under a similar. Lee is suffering under sort of a similar grid of delusion to Frank.
Yes, though it's worth noting that Lee, even though she's sort of she's operating under the same sort of moral system and as you say grid of delusion, but the way that she treats other people, even from the beginning, is much better. And part of this is because I think she was never wealthy and never particularly privileged. I mean, her dad's a doctor, but, she doesn't have a mansion or anything.
No, she did in one of the other things that I found incredibly funny, take an Uber to the spot where she's going to meet her teenage girlfriend to run away and become homeless together. So, comme ci, comme ça. But
yeah, and then they're homeless because, that this is what happens is that you have that stuff until you don't.
Yes.
And like when her girlfriend gives her pushback, she does not react the way that Dr. Frank acts when her girlfriend gives her any pushback.
Right.
When her girlfriend is like, actually, I'm tired of being homeless. I would rather just go back in the closet and live with my parents again for a while. And Leah's like,
yeah. Dr. Frank would have, held on to a vendetta for the rest of her life.
I mean, Dr. Frank would have beaten and intimidated her into staying in the woods. And Leah's like, yeah, I sort of expected that you would do that. Thank you so much for trying to be a homeless queer youth with me.
Yes. No, like they sort of, the whole meat of the book is that, Dr. Frank tells her entire story to Lee, and she tells it in and I think this is intentional. Like Dr. Frank's prose is much more Frankenstein, 20th century, 19th century novel than Lee's or Ash's narrative voice.
Mm-hmm.
Although once again, the author I think is not quite skilled enough to actually separate them, but there is Z's voice is distinctly worse, which is unfortunate because she has most of the novel. But and Z's, fabulism. I don't think that we're meant to believe that her father actually said about her, she is cursed with your mother's dark skin. Right. The Texas oil man probably didn't say that,
Right.
I think we're meant eventually to understand that Z is engaging in a kind of self-justifying fabulism and trying to create this idea of a personal connection between, Lee, you're just like me, you're going to follow in my footsteps,
Right.
and I'm going to impregnate you with the next generation of new and improved monster.
Right.
So it is. So I think now, half an hour into it, I'm going to get to the point that I was trying to make, which is that I think that you can view this as as the sort of I mean, and this is again complicated by the fact that Z does say queer and non-binary a lot.
Yes.
But it does feel like one generation of queer feminists and another generation of queer feminists. And the thing that really cemented this reading for me was that it's not any of the obviously horrific and abusive things that that Z does that cause Lee to cotton on.
It's that Z is persistently misgendering her monstrous child.
It's that Lee refuses to use the Sasquatch that has been raised in the woods entirely on Audre Lorde and other critical theory.
See, this is what I mean. This has got to be deliberate.
It is incredibly funny, is the thing.
Right.
I'm not like, I really want to stress, and I'm sorry that we got into that argument before. I'm not giving this book the benefit of the doubt in terms of its intentions and its ideas. It's the execution. But
I think that and part of where we disagree is that I think the execution is slightly better than you're giving it credit for. I think part of the problem is that you haven't read Frankenstein.
I don't care if I don't care whether it's whether it's aping of Frankenstein's language is good or not. But more to the point, it's like, yes, we're not going to use. It's the fact that the old crusty turf refuses to use Dia as Ash's pronouns that finally lets Lee realize that she is like an irredeemable monster who's just using her.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's entirely generational. I mean, I think that some of this is, because again, Z is actually fairly up to date on the lingo. I think that this isn't a story about two generations of queer feminism. I think that this is a story about people who, it is a story about people who use the language of oppression and their membership in an oppressed minority group as, and the fact that they can say the right buzzwords as an excuse to treat people terribly. And I don't actually think that that's a generational thing. I think that we're still seeing that.
I agree. It's just also worth noting that Z is at least 20 years older than
yes, because the age difference is part of what Z is doing in terms of abuse. But and part of this is because, as you say, this novel isn't particularly placed in time. And so they don't talk like different generations. I mean, when you factor in the sort of conscious aping of Frankenstein's prose, when it comes to the vocabulary words, they use femme and masc and butch and non-binary and pretty much all with the same. Their vocabulary around queerness is basically the same, and you could read that as Z specifically adopting language of the new generation so that she can draw Lee in. But really it's that I think that this is more a story of how people can basically run an affinity scam on other members of their group to get away with whatever they want.
Sure. I agree with that. I think that I'm mostly sort of leaning into the generational part because we just read Sappho's Bar and Grill. It wouldn't have occurred to me otherwise.
Right. And the thing is that this book still does work as a very good sort of, counter or commentary on what's going on in Sappho's Bar and Grill, because a lot of what's going on in Sappho's Bar and Grill is sort of the idea that there's an inherent goodness or badness to your identity.
Yes. I am 100% with you on that. Reading The Book Eaters, followed by Payback's a Witch, followed by Sappho's Bar and Grill, really made it hard for me to give a book the benefit of the doubt, which is why I'm so dense here. So again, like, I think this book has really good ideas. I think the prose is excruciating in places. I think that the structure is bizarre. And again, I know that the whole, we're recounting, you know, our lives, and then the actual action of the book is very abbreviated, is again probably a result of the source material.
Yes.
But the sheer, the way that this book doesn't actually get an ending is very strange.
And that again is
like,
pretty much straight from the source material, but
yeah, and it's like, that's, you know, I probably wouldn't enjoy reading Frankenstein. I'll just put it that way. Can we let's so like, it's like, I found this a very frustrating and difficult read, but and part of that was that it really took me until it took me until about 3/4 of the way through the book to understand that the book understood how awful a person that Frank was, and you know, that it wasn't meant to be excusing her behavior, right? So I was like, what is going on for most of my reading experience here? And then there are like, there's some, and the way that it's so divorced from the real world, like, it reminded me a lot of sort of this is like, I was like, how old is this author? Is this a precocious, like, very young person writing this book? And what parts of their life experience are they bringing to this?
Well, the author is dead, so.
The author is dead, but I want to know in what world, you know, you can go among the teenage homeless and be like, ugh, their dependence on MDMA. But anyway, I did enjoy the inclusion of Mandarin in the as sort of asides, in the way that you would sort of get little sprinklings of French to sort of exoticize your tone.
Right.
I mean, it seemed very deliberate, and like a dark, funny joke, how like we're going to use the names for food and, like, you know, Chinese 101 phrases here.
Right, exactly.
Like, you know, family members in Waju Li, you know.
Oh, the face I'm making.
I know, I'm sorry. It's hard for a person who naturally has no affect in their voice to speak a tonal language, okay?
Well, no, but it's also that it's pronounced Jiao.
Yes, sorry. But I thought that was very funny, and it is sort of a way that the book tips its hand early, that it's a very playful sort of a book in that way.
Yes.
It's also its playfulness and its darkness, you know, mixed in a way that I quite like generally from literature. And there is something incredibly funny about about Ash the Sasquatch being raised in the woods on critical theory.
Right, exactly. By, you know, a kindly woodsman.
A kindly woodsman.
A kindly woodsman who's just like a homeless guy.
Yeah, a homeless guy who happens to be really versed in the right books to be giving the Sasquatch, and whose final frustration with him is that you keep ripping all of the clothes that I'm getting.
I cannot keep dumpster diving.
There are no people large enough who are throwing their clothes away for me to keep you in clothes.
Right, exactly. Like,
and it's the way that this is meant to be. There is, and it's like, okay, this is being treated with the same amount of gravity that, you know, the horrific abuses that the other parent figures in the books, you know, inflicted on this person. You know, it's like, I don't know. It's interesting. Like, are we meant to like, you know, because we know that Frank uses her own traumatic past. She weaponizes it, right?
Right.
She uses it as a tool to both justify her own ambitions and to manipulate the people around her.
Yes.
And to, you know, justify all of her more or less amoral decision making.
Yes.
And Ash the Sasquatch also murders a 4-year-old child.
And frames his mother for it.
And frames his, well, not his, the child's mother, yes.
Yeah, the child. Yes. Ash's pronoun is Dia. So, okay, actually, so I want to get into this because I think that the issue of cultural appropriation in this book is handled in a really interesting way. Because initially, the thing that sets up Z's father as bad is his, like, you know, breezy disregard for cultural appropriation and how, you know, so you have Z's mother in tears being forced to do this, like, Javanese wedding ceremony when she's, you know, like, Malaysian Chinese in Indonesia. And so, you know, and so she's in tears. And which again, she's this teenager who's not particularly educated is in tears that, you know, she's appropriating somebody else's wedding ceremony.
Right. Now, and like, I just want, like, at that point in the book, I was still like, wow, this seems overegged and dumb.
Right, but it, you know, and so, but it's initially setting this up as, well, this is a way that you can tell that, you know, her mother is innocent and good, and her father is, you know, evil because he's like everything you could ever imagine in a white imperialist.
Right.
But then you get her mother later saying, okay, you can't call yourself Kalalai. That's not our language. That's not our gender system. Yes, it's her, and Z is like, Dr. Frank is like, but we're all from Indonesia, right? And her mother's like, you know, is attempting to explain there's different ethnic groups in Indonesia. And Z is just like, nope, we're all from Indonesia. It's fine. And calls herself Kalalai throughout the book. And so, okay, well, maybe this is that Dr. Frank is, you know, this is one of the many ways in which she's bad like her father. Except that then Ash does the same thing.
Yes, yes, he does.
Dia does. We are not going to be like Dr. Frank. We are going to use the pronoun that Ash has chosen, even though Ash's chosen pronoun of Dia is in fact an act of cultural appropriation, because Ash is not, again, this is taken from a gender system that is not Ash's, you know, ethnic cultural heritage at all.
Which gender system is it from?
I mean, I don't know a lot about Indonesia, but we know that it's from the same system as, you know, that it's from apparently South Sulawesi, according to the book. And this is a word that, you know, is initially referred to like a specific kind of, you know, religious category, according to the book. I did not bother looking any of this up. But that, you know, and so, but again, this is somebody who because the person who gets the final say, who gets both the first and last word over the story is Lee. So to some degree, Lee as the primary narrative voice gets to be the moral, you know, gets to place herself as the moral arbiter of the story. And so clearly Dr. Frank is bad, even though we get a lot of Dr. Frank's own, you know, first person narrative and self-justification. And, you know, and clearly Ash is good because Lee feels bad for Ash and wants to, and partly because Ash is being persistently misgendered and also because they've both been abused by the same person. But, you know, if you step away from Lee's narrative voice, and I think that the text really encourages that because it's already primed you to be stepping away from, you know, Dr. Frank's narrative voice, you realize that this is somebody who's doing many of the same things and also murdered a 4-year-old.
Yes. I just want to point, I've done a little bit of Googling here, and I just want to point out that Dia is just Malay gender neutral third person pronoun.
So it's just ta. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, but still, this isn't a language that...
Dia has Malay heritage, and Dia is perfectly, it's reasonable that Dia should refer to Dia as such. But
to refer to Dia as Bisu, which I don't know much about.
I mean, I don't know. That's the other kid, right?
No. Bisu is the gender that Dia refers to, and I believe that's That's not a like Malaysian Chinese thing.
Right. Gender in Boogie society. I should probably have done this research beforehand.
So, well, the thing is, we have Ash's own word. Ash says that Bisu comes from the same system as Kalabai and Kalalai. And
it is, in fact, from the same system as Kalalai.
And we already
and that's
know...
from the Bugis society, in case you're wondering.
We know from Dr. Frank's mother that this is not a cultural practice that she feels like they have any right to claim.
I'm not gonna pretend that looking up the article on Wikipedia makes us experts about the Bugis Society. I don't even know if that's how it's pronounced. It probably isn't. But if you want to look up more, it's spelled Bugis. Right. So, it's almost as though cultural appropriation is a fake idea, but
right. I think that part of the point of this book is that, I'm not going to say that part of the point of this book is that cultural appropriation is a fake idea, but part of the point of this book is the way that, different people can try to legitimize their claim on gender and culture. And that doesn't necessarily fly.
Yes. It's like, if I were to sort of zoom out, I would be like, well, obviously none of these people are perfect. As you pointed out, all of these people are very messy, queer people. All of these people are using, they have good reasons to be traumatized and to be imperfect. But there is a distinct difference between the way that Frank does it and the way that any of the other characters do it.
Sort of, though again, Ash did murder a child.
Ash did murder a child and is now stalking Frank and stalking and terrorizing Frank. And, there might be more healthy ways for Ash to figure out Dia's deal. Right. But Dia is also stuck with acromegaly and gigantism, and therefore has limited... I love the idea, the book mentions that Dia goes to a public library to look this stuff up, and I can't imagine what that would look like to the other patrons, that this giant, if you've ever seen Andre the Giant, who is name checked in this book and yes. was another sufferer of acromegaly, which they can now save you from that, but since Dia spent his entire, childhood and young adult life in the woods away from medical intervention, Dia is definitely not going to make it past his late 30s, but that's a different
Dia's
story.
Late 30s.
God damn it. I'm trying. I'm not deliberately doing it.
Because, we can forgive murder of a 4-year-old child, but God forbid we misgender somebody.
Well, see, that's part of the point I'm making, and part of why I think this book is like a real dark satire in certain ways.
I think it is, yes.
If you look at, nobody comes off well here.
No, I mean, the people who come off the best are, the poor girlfriends of two of our viewpoint characters.
I don't know if they come off that well. They seem to be real doormats.
In terms of not doing terribly cruel things to people. Actually, I mean, of our 3 viewpoint characters, I guess Lee comes off the best in that, she hasn't murdered anybody or even tried.
Lee does not murder anybody, and isn't even mean to, what is her girlfriend's name?
Coco, I think.
Yeah, Coco, when she was like, I don't know if I want to go in for elective trans homelessness, actually.
Right, and then again, of course, Lee is totally willing to overlook murder, so...
I mean,
and they all up and flee to Indonesia.
Yes, they do.
No, which I'm sure is just... is known famously for its tolerance.
Oh my God.
Of queer, disabled, mixed race people, mixed race American refugees.
Yeah, I like the way that the book sort of mentions Muslim, the sort of Muslim part of the heritage once and then hand waves it away. And it's like, oh, let's go live in a theocracy. I'm sure nothing bad will happen. But yeah, no, I was not, shall I say, persuaded by the epilogue that this was likely to be a happy ending.
Right.
But I don't think I was supposed to be, right?
Right. Exactly. Because, okay, the happy ending is a bunch of us ran off to Indonesia, a country where none of us speak the language and, none of us have any legal right to live in. And one of us, did murder a 4-year-old.
Oh, can I tell you? Because I was really struggling particularly with Z's sections, because it's like, I'm listening to the ramblings of a narcissistic asshole. And,
right.
She also talks in a way that no human being has ever talked. And, but what really helped me was like, oh, she was born in America. She did not learn a word of Malay or, any other, or Mandarin or anything like that. So she's going to have a Texan accent. And so all of this is going to be delivered in a Texan accent.
Yes, exactly.
And that helped tremendously as I started to read it in my head in my inimitable Texas accent. "Stand up," he spat into my face. I stood up quickly, quietly. "You dare to correct me when you have been lying and behaving like this all this time? What is it with the two of you? What did I do to deserve such perverse spawn?" He looked briefly at Ezra, who held his head down in shame. "You," he said, his attention and focus back on me, "are my own flesh and blood, and you still are so shameful. You disgust me." He leaned forward and smacked me in the face. The strike of his hand against the silence inside the house rang like two pieces of wood slapping against one another in one clean sound. It doesn't help. It doesn't help.
I will note, this makes our second, Texan who has committed horrible crimes. Our second Asian Texan who has committed horrible crimes in the podcast.
I take Jadao over this person any day of the week.
Look, Jadao is a much more charismatic and, interesting war criminal.
Yes. So to wrap around to the argument that we had and that I edited out at the beginning, I think that, we got our backs up at each other about this really fast. But the point that I wanted to make there was, there is racial animus against white people by the characters in this book, and the book doesn't think that's good.
Yes.
That's what I was trying to say, but it is present. And if you want a content warning about racial animus against white people.
That's true. There's a content warning, Shock, a small press book about, queer mixed race people of color and their extremely messy lives and bad decisions, is not, super positive towards white people.
Yes, that obviously that's fine. That's not my problem with it. It's the I want it to. And this is actually sort of part of the stuff that the book brings up, right? It's like there is entirely reasonable animus against white people on the part of non-white people who've been fucked over by white people for centuries.
Yes.
And in the same way, there's entirely reasonable animus against men by women who have been oppressed and beaten down by men for centuries, if not millennia. But this book sort of delves into into various ways in which that animus can manifest itself.
Yeah.
And the way in which that kind of hatred can turn people monstrous, right?
Right.
Or can feed into people's pre-existing monstrousness, or can be used as a tool by monstrous people.
Yeah.
And that's not me saying, oh, it's bad that they don't like white people. Why can't they just get over it? Oh, it's bad that they don't like men. Why can't they just get over it? It's me being like, one of the themes of this book is how that kind of personal prejudice can harm you.
Yeah.
And other people.
And that I think is totally valid. I was just, perhaps the part that was cut out was perhaps poorly phrased.
Yes, I agree.
And I think that actually the point that you made a while ago that's really good is that, like Lee has a ton of animosity towards her white mother who abandoned her when she was very small, who just like up and left. And from Lee's perspective, this is clearly her mother, looked around and was like, I'm too white for this family. Bye. But that, like, if you look at Lee's relationship with her father, it's far more likely that her mother was like, I am married to an abusive asshole. I'm leaving. And did so.
Yeah. And
violently abusive.
And when Lee talks to her father about this, he reinforces that idea for her, because of course he does, because that's that's how he sees it.
Right. I mean, one of the things you see is understandable animosity towards various oppressive groups being, deployed specifically as an instrument of control by abusive people. And that you also see the ideas of like, well, it must be okay because we're queer. It must be okay because, we're women. It must be okay because it's not America, it's Indonesia.
Yeah.
And I think that the book as a whole has is quite skeptical of this, but it does a very good, but because it's, in very close first person, it really shows the ways in which that can be deployed by people in an attempt to frame narratives where they're the victim and thus nothing they have done could ever be bad.
Yes, I agree entirely.
And then you sit back and you're like, okay, but you did, murder a child. Like, both Z and Ash attempted to murder a child. It's just Ash was successful.
Correct.
And also that you've got a queer non-binary woman of color who is also, her entire life goal is eugenics.
Yes.
Like, her entire life has been devoted to eugenics, and somehow eugenics is bad when her father does it. But, if you ask her, eugenics is exciting and cool. When you ask her, or Lee, for that matter, eugenics is exciting and cool when it's done by a queer woman of color. And then, then the child comes out disabled, and, oh no, suddenly actually eugenics still calls for child murder.
Yeah. And, like, we keep coming back to this, the sort of question of, do we trust, like, we've actually done a sort of a series of books recently where we're like, if we give this book a lot of credit, it's doing some really interesting things. Mm-hmm. And if we don't give this book a lot of credit, it's just, bigoted or, reinforcing bad or just bad on the face of it, right? And like, part of the point of saying that the author is dead is, we can make the book what we want it to be.
Right. But I also think that part of this is that does the text itself, what readings does the text itself best support? I mean,
exactly. There's this. Sorry,
I have, we're not going to get into the details, but I have a reading of the Madoka anime that's very much, against the grain, where it's, a devastating indictment of the entire idea of magical girls, when obviously that's not supported by the text.
Yeah, and we can have our like pet interpretations, and part of the whole business of criticism, and we both went to a school which specialized in teaching us this specific skill at sort of to the exclusion of all other skills, is the ability to sift a text for stuff that supports your argument, your framing, your narrative.
Right.
And if you can't find anything, then you can still
You
can still cling
up.
to your pet narrative if you want.
Right.
But I think in this, but you have to be like at some point, okay, there is actually a qualitative difference between making up a cuckoo bananas reading about a text and making it
and saying that it's entirely plausible that that this is, if not authorial, that this is the clearest reading of the text.
Right, and it's like, again, that authorial intent doesn't mean anything in that context. It's like, I mean, I'm gonna break the Homestuck window again because
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. This is totally justified. It's just now we got to restart the Homestuck counter.
But my friend Malu, who I've shouted out on this podcast before, what he does is he has this he's done this enormous amount of critical reading of Homestuck and has developed this reading where Homestuck is basically all about white fear, racial animus, and sort of the fear of corruption by outside forces. Mm-hmm. And Andrew Hussey certainly didn't intend that when he was writing
but honestly,
Homestuck.
if you look at Andrew Hussey's earlier work, you can, I think that Malu's reading is actually much better supported than a lot of...
That's what I'm saying. It's like people will go to his stuff and be like, oh, a little random, where are you getting this stuff? But there is genuinely, it doesn't matter whether the author was thinking, I'm going to make the work look like this. It's like the author is putting this into the work, taking stuff in from the world, synthesizing it, putting it into the work. And in this case, I think that there's obviously a lot of smart stuff going on here. I think the reading that we've arrived at is the correct one, but I also think that a person could read this book and take it as, and take Dr. Frank's, self-justifying bullshit at face value, and that's not a bad thing. That's part of fiction,
I'm sure that there are people who read Nine Fox Gambit and, totally believe everything Jadao says at face value, and I'm sure that there are people. As
we keep saying, there's people who watch Utena and think that Akio is the good guy.
Right, and there's people who read A Light from Uncommon Stars and believe that what's her face is a small bean who never did anything wrong in her life.
Yeah, I don't know who would possibly.
No, of course not.
Lantron, who did nothing wrong. But yes. So yeah, no, I mean, also it's like we are definitely two white passing people, white people, Jewish white people.
It's the thing about being Jewish is that you are white in most circumstances, and when you're not, it's very scary. Having just rescued my cat from one of those environments.
Yeah, and so you that's our critical perspective. We can't do anything about that. We can try to be very smart and, be very considerate about what we're saying, but we are still talking from the perspective of people who grew up, Jewish but white, in your case, sort of step Jewish but white. In my case, step Jewish but white, really. in America. And so, when you the reader think about our critical takes, you have to, we can't do anything about that. You have to sort of build that into what you take away from what we're saying,
Yes. And that's again, and that's where, the author is dead, I think works a lot better with fiction than it does when you're reading criticism, where it's actually really helpful to know some things about the author.
Yes, exactly.
The author is dead. The podcasters are, very much alive.
Yes, for better or worse. But
I do think, because you're right, that it's a sort of a running theme is how much benefit of the doubt are we going to give the text for a more or less sophisticated reading. And I think in this case, I think that the book earns the reading that we've given of it, that it's doing some really smart things.
Yes, and it does occasionally pause and step on your foot and be like, you get it?
Right.
Like it insisting on citing one book and footnoting it every time it cites it. And that book is Frankenstein.
Right.
Which is, again, really funny. So it's like, the book is like, we're being academic about this. Please read this like an academic text. And so I think that's what we were attempting to do there.
I think so, yes. But yeah,
Yes.
it's again, this is...
And my apologies for being rude about the prose, but my God, it was difficult to get through it sometimes. And that's just me saying it.
And and this is one of those, I feel like it was not spot on, partly because it's trying to, I think it did a creditable job of achieving a hybrid between between the extremely affected language of 19th century novel and and the extremely affected language of modern day queer theory. So
yeah. And it's just that, like,
and I mean, the fact that neither of these are all breezy, fun, or like particularly engaging read does make the text a little bit more challenging. But
here's an extra thing to factor into my takes for the listener of this podcast is I hate most classic novels. I can't stand most classic pre-20th century literature, and you will have to factor that into the way that I think about things. I'm sorry, Dostoevsky, you and Tolstoy can fuck off, and I don't care what is happening in the mill on the floss. I do not care for Henry James, Flaubert can suck my nuts. I will allow Dickens and Austen, but only 'cause they make jokes. Also, Jane Eyre is good.
I mean, I do believe that if you're going to read like pre-contemporary classic literature, you should just read Story of the Stone.
Oh, it's great. It's great. And the translations are very readable.
Yes.
Also.
Yes, they are. But yeah, so, and I don't know. So I'm coming back to, this is what I meant by, it was sort of hard to articulate, but like, I think that this book is doing a lot of interesting things, and including this book is doing a lot of interesting things with language. It's just that the languages that it's playing with are not easily accessible. And that, to like a modern day American reader. And that does make the book a bit of a challenge, but if you want a book that's interesting, I think that this one is at least worth poking at. Oh, and one random side note: this book is already dated in its abortion politics.
Yep. I mean,
like abortion rights are actually worse than this fairly dystopian book about the lack of reproductive justice.
I mean, it is set in Texas. But even then,
no, like it's very specific. Like when Hannah is like, "Well, I was impregnated without my consent, but by the time I found this out, I was too far along to get an abortion in this state, and it's not safe to travel." But like at this point, most of the states that this book is set in, abortion is completely outlawed now. So good job. Contemporary American politics outpacing the dystopian book.
Yes. Oh my God. So next time we are going to. Sorry.
Sorry.
Next time we're going to head back to. It's not going to get any more normal, folks.
No. Next time we're going retro.
Yes, we are going to discuss Tomoe Gozen, and it's by Jessica Amanda Salmonson. So, and it's from the 80s, so just gird your loins for that. Yeah. So
I read this book. I read that book when I was 13, and some, in terms of nominations for images that have stuck with you the longest. All right. All right. See you guys.
So yeah. Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.